Everyone assumes something went wrong. Maybe the marriage failed. Maybe he never found the right woman. Maybe the kids grew up and the house went quiet. And now here he is eating dinner over the sink, keeping the television on for company, waiting for a life that never quite arrived. That is the story people expect. But then you look closer, and it gets harder to explain. Because a lot of these men are not falling apart. They are not waiting to be rescued. They are not secretly hoping someone moves in and finally fixes their curtains, their diet, and the fact that they own 7 flashlights, but somehow no matching towels. Many of them are doing something that still feels strange by the old rules. They are peaceful. And that difference between a man who is broken and a man who is settled matters more than most people think. Because this is not loneliness. This is a generation that was quietly trained for solitude long before anyone called it a lifestyle. Somewhere right now, a Gen X man named David is having the best Saturday morning he has had all week. Coffee made exactly the way he likes it. No one has moved the mug he always uses. No one has started a conversation before his brain has finished loading. The house is quiet. There is a book on the table that has been waiting for 2 months for this weekend. Nobody needs anything from him for the next several hours. And he knows it. There is a specific kind of peace in that knowledge that is very hard to explain to someone who has never had to fight for it. David lives alone, and people keep feeling sorry for him. He notices it, this slightly lowered voice when someone asks if he is seeing anyone, the pause after he says no, the little tilt of the head that means, "Oh, that's sad." He used to be irritated by it. Now he mostly finds it interesting, because the life people are imagining for him is not the life he is living. They imagine a waiting room, and he experiences a workshop. To understand how he got here, you have to understand where he came from. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980, currently mid-40s to late 50s. They arrived after the boomers and before the millennials and spent most of their lives being culturally overlooked. The generation nobody made manifestos for, nobody particularly noticed, which suited them fine. They had been overlooked before. These were the latchkey kids, the boys who came home from school to an empty house and figured out the afternoon alone. They made sandwiches. They microwaved things that should never have been microwaved. They went outside until dark. They learned which neighbors were weird and which dogs were dangerous without anyone explaining the system. Nobody called this emotional development. They called it Tuesday. David grew up that way. A key in his pocket, parents working, divorce in the air, either in his own house or in half the houses on the street. Mothers becoming tougher because they had to. Fathers working hard, saying little, carrying their feelings like locked metal boxes no one had the combination for. He learned that adults could love each other and still make a house feel like a legal dispute with furniture. He learned that institutions looked solid until they suddenly weren't. So, he learned to read the room, when to speak, when to disappear, when to stay quiet because the adults were having one of those evenings. But here is the part that gets missed when people describe latchkey childhoods as purely a deficit. Those 4 unsupervised hours after school were also, in their own strange way, formative. He read what he wanted. He built opinions nobody assigned him. He discovered early that silence was not always empty. Sometimes silence was where his thoughts finally stopped being interrupted. A boy like that often becomes a man who values peace in a way other people don't always understand. Not excitement, not constant stimulation, not the drama that gets confused with passion. Peace. A quiet morning, a decent knife in the kitchen. A Saturday where nobody has volunteered him for brunch with people he barely remembers. For a man who grew up learning to read emotional weather and stay out of its path, a house that asks nothing from him is not emptiness. It is the prize. And that training never left. It just aged into something very specific. By the time David was a man, he had a clear set of instructions from the generations before him. Find a good woman, get married, build a home, provide, keep going. If you are unhappy, work harder. The problem was that Gen X men came of age right when the world started rewriting all the lines at once. Women were becoming more independent, which was good and necessary. But the old bargain changed faster than anyone could explain. Men were still expected to provide and protect, but also to be emotionally available, ambitious but not absent, strong but not controlling, modern when required, traditional when convenient, and somehow know which version was needed before breakfast. So, a lot of them went looking for what you might call the impossible woman, the unicorn. Not literally, though after a few failed relationships, the horn might have helped with the paperwork. The unicorn was the woman who would understand his need for space, but never feel neglected. Independent, but still wanting him in the old ways. Modern, but not exhausting. Low drama, warm, and completely fine, with the fact that sometimes he needed 6 hours alone to fix something. Read about a war that ended 70 years ago, or stare into the middle distance like a man buffering. To be fair, women had impossible lists too. Everybody was shopping for someone assembled in a laboratory by a committee of their private wounds. So, David did what he was supposed to do. He dated. He tried. Maybe even married. Maybe he bought the house, had the children, hosted the holidays, smiled in the photos, and tried to become the man the culture said would finally be respected. And then, reality arrived. The marriage was harder than anyone admitted beforehand. Some men were not good husbands, and they know it. Some were decent men married to someone equally exhausted, both performing a life that had stopped fitting. Some were betrayed. Some simply woke up one day and realized the home had become a place where two people were managing disappointment in the same building and calling it life. When the marriage ended, it didn't feel like a breakup. For many men, it felt like being processed by an institution. Lawyers, courtrooms, custody calendars, asset division, support payments. The strange discovery that a life built over many years can be translated into numbers on a form. A man walks in thinking he is a father, a husband, a provider, a person with history. Then the system starts speaking, and soon he feels like a schedule, a payment plan, and a liability with shoes. This pattern, feeling that the legal architecture around divorce wasn't designed with his interests in mind, shows up frequently enough across the US, UK, Canada, and Australia to be worth naming. Not in every case, but often enough that for many men, the experience hardened into a lasting private lesson. Never again give an institution that much access to his daily life. In the men who process this well, it doesn't become bitterness. It becomes something more durable, clarity, a sharp understanding of where they can be vulnerable and where they cannot. A skepticism toward official narratives about marriage and what men are supposed to want that isn't nihilism. It is evidence-based caution. They opted out, not dramatically, not with a manifesto, just by making different decisions one at a time until those decisions accumulated into a life that was actually their own. After the divorce, after the long relationship finally ends, there is often a first quiet evening. David remembers his. The apartment felt too still at first. The kind of quiet where the refrigerator sounds like it has opinions, boxes against the wall, a television on the floor because buying a proper stand felt less urgent than surviving the week. He expected loneliness to arrive. It did, a little. But it didn't arrive alone. Something else came with it. Relief. No argument waiting in the kitchen. No emotional weather to predict before speaking. No one asking why he had kept that one box of cables containing every adapter known to mankind, except the one he actually needed. He bought the food he actually eats. He slept diagonally if he wanted. He set the thermostat like a free citizen. Slowly, the nervous system settled, not all at once. Men like David are not usually dramatic about their own recovery. They don't announce a new era. They just notice that they are sleeping better, thinking more clearly, taking a walk after dinner instead of sitting in a room full of tension while everyone performs fine. He may also have a dog, possibly two. Animals that follow no social script, require no emotional negotiation, and are genuinely delighted to see him every single time without needing anything explained. And at some point, what was supposed to be a temporary sad phase became a permanent upgrade. The never-married Gen X man arrives at the same place by a different route. He simply saw the contract early and never liked the terms. He watched friends marry, suffer, divorce, recover, remarry, and suffer differently, and thought quietly, with no need to make a speech. No, thank you. His home became, over the decades, a tuned instrument. He knows where everything is. He may not own decorative pillows, but he knows how to make a real breakfast and how to sit beside a friend who is going through hell without making it about himself. And then there is the widower, whose path is the quietest of all. For him, living alone didn't start as a choice. It started with a loss that nobody jokes their way through. He spent years in a strange country where love and exhaustion lived in the same room. And when it was over, when people told him he was still young and that she would have wanted him to be happy, he may have felt something more complicated. He loved once, fully. He kept his vows in the hardest version of that sentence. And now, when the house is quiet, he may simply not want to reconstruct that same architecture with someone else. Peace after grief is not emptiness. For many of these men, it is the first thing the nervous system can actually accept after years of being braced. There is a framework in evolutionary psychology that has the specific quality of explaining something you already sensed but couldn't name. It's called the Savannah theory of happiness. The proposal is that the human brain was optimized for a hunter-gatherer environment. Small bands, close cooperation, constant social proximity. For most people, frequent social interaction activates ancient reward circuits because, in that original environment, belonging to the group was survival. But for individuals with higher cognitive complexity, those circuits tend to exert less pull. The brain is flexible enough to meet its needs through other means: deep intellectual engagement, creative work, self-directed thinking, without requiring constant group affirmation. And here is the finding that runs against most of what we assume. For many high IQ individuals, frequent obligatory social interaction can actually decrease life satisfaction. Not because they don't care about people, because the cognitive load of managing constant social input disrupts how their minds actually function. This isn't a claim about every intelligent person, and it isn't a claim that solitude is superior. It is a cleaner explanation for why some men who are clearly capable of connection, clearly not depressed, clearly not broken, simply run better in quiet. For David, solitude is not an absence. It is an environment. His mind processes things more completely when it isn't managing competing inputs. The stillness isn't emptiness. It is the condition under which the interior world operates. When people ask why he'd rather stay in, the honest answer, if I don't get a few hours of actual quiet, my brain starts running like a browser with 47 tabs open, sounds antisocial. So, he says he's busy. What he means is that silence, for him, is not empty. Silence is occupied. The distinction that matters here is between solitude and loneliness. They share one surface feature, a single person alone, and are otherwise completely different. Loneliness is involuntary and painful. Solitude is chosen and purposeful. David knows which side of that line he is on. He has been on both sides. He is not confused about the difference. Here is the thing that rarely makes it into conversations about men like David, because it challenges something repeated so often, it has started to feel like fact. Married men live longer. You've heard this. It gets cited as a gentle warning. Statistical evidence that the solo life carries an invisible cost that will eventually appear in the numbers. The data, read carefully, is more interesting than that. When you look at what these studies actually compared, the unmarried category is doing an enormous amount of work. It includes men who are involuntarily alone, isolated, financially precarious, grieving, or who never partnered partly because poor health made it difficult. Comparing happily married men against that broad and struggling category and concluding that marriage itself causes better health. That is not a clean finding. That is, as one researcher put it, selection bias wearing a lab coat. The better data point is not marriage itself, but quality of connection. When researchers separate who chose their situation from who had it happen to them, and control for genuine social integration, and whether a man is actually satisfied with his life, the picture changes dramatically. Marital conflict specifically carries measurable biological cost. Sustained stress from an unhappy or high-conflict marriage tends to produce elevated cortisol, higher blood pressure, and worse cardiovascular markers over time. The marriage certificate on its own protects nothing. What protects is chosen connection and genuine peace. And this is where the socially integrated solo man, the one with real friendships, who hosts dinner, who is engaged rather than grinding through daily domestic tension, starts to look quite different from the cautionary tale. Not every man, not every case, but often enough to form a real pattern. He didn't get lucky, he built the conditions. There is something hiding in plain sight when you look at men like David. He can cook. Not in the way that means he can assemble a meal without looking helpless. In the way that means he has a preferred method for braising, opinions about stock, a vendor at the market whose mushrooms he is loyal to. He learned knives. He learned heat. He learned, as any serious cook eventually does, that garlic burns faster than pride. University of Michigan researchers tracking Generation X adults over 25 years found that men in this cohort cook an average of 8 meals a week and take primary or equal responsibility for grocery shopping. That is a structural reversal from the generation before them, and it happened quietly, without ceremony. For the solo man, the kitchen becomes more than sustenance. It is where focus and creativity meet in a way the rest of the day doesn't always offer. A physical process with a concrete edible result. And it is how he stays connected without surrendering the terms. He may not say, "I value our friendship and want to maintain a meaningful social bond." He says, "Come over Saturday. I'm making ribs." Same message, much better sauce. He invites people in, feeds them well, talks for a few hours, maybe argues about music or whether modern films have become too long, which they have, but that is a separate conversation. Then everyone leaves. The quiet returns. The dishwasher hums in the dark, while he stands there feeling oddly satisfied. Studies involving over 21,000 individuals in Japan documented a direct link between high-level cooking skill and robust social networks and community connection. When David has people over, which he does regularly on his own schedule, he sets the terms, makes something he is proud of, and when everyone leaves, he has his house back. The happiest solo men are not the ones with no attachments. They are the ones with attachments that don't swallow them. A couple of strong ties instead of a crowd of weak ones. Not at every event, but when they show up, actually there. This is not loneliness managed with garnish. This is a social life run entirely on his own terms. The stereotype is clear. The divorced man who lives alone has been moved to the margins of his own family. The holiday father shows up for the good parts, gone before the hard ones. That version exists, but it misses what a significant number of these men actually do with the role they have. Gen X fathers are strikingly different from the fathers who raised them. They watched those men be emotionally sealed, present in body, absent everywhere else, and many made a quiet decision not to repeat that. More willing to say the actual thing, more likely to sit with the complicated conversation rather than redirect it, more comfortable with, "I don't know. What do you think?" The man who has his children every other week. When he has them, he is fully there. Not managing simultaneous marital tension, not distracted by unresolved conflict in the next room. He planned what they are going to do because he wanted to. He made something they like. He is operating at capacity because he has been taking care of himself in the weeks between. Research consistently finds that lone fathers create nurturing, functional environments, and that outcomes for children in single-father households track better than stereotypes suggest. What children need is not a specific domestic configuration. It is a parent who shows up with intention, presence, consistency. The holiday father reframed, a man who used his time carefully, who taught the child to make eggs, ask better questions, and stay roughly calm when life gets inconvenient, who accepted he may not live in the same house every day, but became a stable place in his child's mind. That is not a consolation prize. That is parenting that works. Women find him attractive, sometimes surprisingly so, including younger ones, and he knows it, which makes it more so. It is not the flashiness. It is the settled energy, the competence, the fact that he is not auditioning for anything or performing a version of himself assembled for someone else's approval. But here is the thing. He notices the interest. He may even welcome it. And then he quietly, deliberately chooses his solitude anyway. Not because something is missing, because something finally is not. He is not sealed off. He is not performing independence to mask a fear of intimacy. He has a romantic life, a really good one in many cases. What defines it is not absence, but structure. Research on what psychologists call the self-expansion model suggests that financially independent women, and the current generation of women is more financially independent than any before them, are not primarily looking for material provision. They tend to look for settled energy, for a person who has done the actual work of figuring himself out, for the absence of performance that comes when a man has stopped needing to prove anything. David has stopped needing to prove anything. But what defines his arrangement is what he insists on. They see each other. There is real feeling. Neither of them lives in the other's home, and neither of them wants to. This has a name in the demographic literature, living apart together, or LAT. It is not a compromise or a half measure. It is the configuration that allows full emotional intimacy to coexist with full spatial autonomy. Connection, warmth, depth, and then home to his own space. And so does she, and both of them are more than fine with it. Mental health data on LAT relationships for adults over 50 is consistently positive. It provides all the benefits of connection while removing the specific stressors of shared domesticity, the slow erosion of the self that happens when two people merge further than they intended to, the moment where you look up and realize you have become furniture in each other's lives. To younger people, this can sound like fear of commitment. To David, it sounds like wisdom that finally found a parking space. He wants to miss a woman a little. That sounds small, It isn't. Missing someone means the relationship is still being entered voluntarily, not endured by default because both names are on the lease. That space is not emotional avoidance. It is what keeps attraction from slowly becoming administration. Japan reached this terrain first and built an economy around it. Ohitori-sama, the art of doing things alone without apology. Restaurants with privacy partitions for solo diners, karaoke rooms built for one, solo travel packages. An economy estimated at around $80 billion built on the recognition that one person spending money is not a social problem. It is a market. By 2035, projections suggest half of all Japanese citizens over 15 will live alone. The response has not been a national conversation about loneliness. It has been product development, which is, in its pragmatic way, a form of respect. Germany has 17 million people living alone, 20% of the entire population. Researchers studying midlife solo dwellers found that what determines whether solo living goes well or badly is not the arrangement itself. It is the quality of the network. People who thrive maintain diverse, active social contact. People who struggle have become passive, waiting for connection instead of initiating it. The setup is neutral. The person inside it is what matters. In the US, Canada, the UK, and Australia, 36% of all households headed by someone over 50 have a single occupant. Demographers are no longer treating this as aberration. They are treating it as population structure. David is ahead of the data. He has been living this for years without needing the data to confirm it. There is a kind of loneliness that happens inside relationships, and many of these men know it from personal experience. Sitting beside someone who no longer sees you. Sleeping next to someone who feels miles away. Eating dinner in a house full of tension while everyone performs fine. Compared to that, an empty room can feel just clean. Society still has trouble with a man who is content without asking permission. If he lives alone, people assume he is damaged. If he seems happy, they assume he is performing. If he cooks well, fathers his children, maintains real friendships, and sleeps soundly, people still ask with that particular tone when he is going to settle down. But many of these men already settled down into themselves. They stopped treating life like a waiting room for the approved version. They stopped apologizing for wanting quiet. I noticed something about these men while spending time in the research, and then checking it against people I actually know. The ones who landed somewhere good after the divorce, or the long search, or the grief, almost all of them rebuilt the same way. Not by becoming hermits, by becoming deliberate. A man I know who fits this description started hosting low-key dinners after the dust settled. Nothing elaborate, good food, a few people he actually liked. The house smelled like garlic and rosemary. And the best part, he said, was when the guests left. The quiet that followed felt earned, not empty. He wasn't performing for anyone. He was just living the earned quiet. That is the thing. That is not loneliness with a composed face. That is a man who built a rhythm that suits him. The research, read carefully, backs him up. The connection that actually drives health and longevity is not a marriage certificate. It is presence, intention, and bonds maintained with real effort over real time. He has those. The life satisfaction that correlates with well-being is not a domestic configuration. It is volition, the sense that you chose this, that it is yours, that it fits. His boundaries may seem excessive from the outside. From the inside, they are load-bearing walls. He is not waiting. He is not settling. He is not a cautionary tale or a man who needs a concerned forwarded article. He is a man who figured out what his life needed to look like, and then made it look like that. The coffee was good this morning. Saturday is his. If this exploration of the modern Gen X experience changed how you view the quiet strength of those living on their own terms, please subscribe and like the channel. We are uncovering the social shifts and personal histories that the world often tries to overlook. Let's plant the seeds for a more understood future. The next chapter of our investigation will open soon.